tried a couple of color test figures. We've also gone over different ways you can approach the oils, how to do blending with a secondary brush, mixing on the figure itself. We did a couple of these guys. We did their faces. We tried out the metals for the first time. We found out that those worked pretty well. And as we did before, we're working with the Mig Ammo oil brushes. We're going to use a little more of this one, the Summer Soil, because as you can see in these images, especially the one on the left, we've got some in the quilted winter gear here. We're also going to employ some of the green tones here because we're going to be working on got a couple of guys with helmets. So I think we've got a pretty decent array. We have more bread bags. We have some metal going on here. So this will be a really good test, again, for those Mig Ammo oil brusher metals. And we've got some of our brick wall bases. I think we've got 8 guys here, including an anti-tank rifle. We've got brushes, again, the craft brushes, just a quick review. So, set of 12 for $5. Got them at Hobby Lobby. You can also find them online. We do also have some sponges here because I'm gonna go with the wetter method that we described. I think it's just an easier way to do it on especially a larger batch of figures like this. And we want to see how much we can get done in not a lot of time. That's the whole point of using the oils and everything else. We've got, as we did before, the white spirits from Speedball, specifically Mona Lisa, and it really is odorless, and it's really gentle on the paint. It's you can really glaze with that. It just works like water, or even better, some type of a medium. Now this one, I think what we're gonna do is, well, we will work it like we've got here. So we got some red Bics, we got our wood, but all the while we have to keep in mind that we're going to be putting the snow over the top, even on the uniform itself. And of course the anti-tank rifle, another opportunity to really use our metallic paint. And here we can see finished one with green helmet and our homemade brick fortifications. So we've talked about all of our materials. Now it's time to get some paint on the rest of our squad here. As I mentioned in the setup for this, I'm going to go with the so-called wet approach. So I've got my Payne's Gray and my raw umber that I essentially made into a homemade oil brusher. Also got my white spirits here, just like we did before. So we're going to thin this down to essentially create a glaze. I like to have a few different colors. You probably have seen me in the acrylic versions creating several different glaze colors. The reason we do this is we want to have that capillary action. See how that just, wow, look at how it just works its way down into all the crevices. And I know it looks like we're wiping out all of that pre-shading that we did. And speaking of which, that was done with the Badger Stino Res primers as always. So here's a little more of the Payne's Gray. Now let's get a little more of the Payne's Gray out here. Why not? It's again a bluish black type color. Put a little more of that out there. And let's hit the base. And already, I have to remind myself that I'm working with oils and that I don't have to rush. I don't have to, oh man, they're going to be dry in just a matter of minutes or even seconds. No, this is going to remain wet for a while. So I've got my sponge. And what we're going to do is, we're soaking up some of the excess. I can even use my scissors. Let's say I want a different shape. So made myself a smaller one that I can get into this little area right here. It would have been more difficult to do that. I also have these. Now these are going to remove a little bit more because they're a little stiffer than the super soft facial sponges, but they are handy. See, the face now has a bit more just overall, and we'll compare this to one that doesn't have our little pre-shading. So straight away we have something a little more to work with now. And again, it's not essential. We're not trying to pull away everything. We're just getting rid of some of the excess. Now I sometimes have to put a few drops, a few more color drops out here. It's interesting when the paint is completely 100% oil, it seems to go much farther than when you actually thin it down like this. I'm sure that's just more of an illusion than anything else. It's not really quite like that. I know this is not the most thrilling aspect here, but it's part of army painting. If you're just doing one-off figures, it's a different mindset. And what I'm trying to take you through here is as much about mindset and process as anything else. I think we've got that pretty well covered, so back to the sponge. Now, things like this, the sponge can snag on things, so that's why it's not a lot of pressure. It looks like I'm really hammering away at it, but it's relatively, pressure is not super heavy. So again, if I feel the need to alter the size of the sponge or the type of sponge, I'm actually gonna have to get me more of these. I just got them on Amazon, I'm sure. Whatever drugstore, Walgreens, CVS, whatever in the US, and then whatever they are might be by you in Europe. So here's the other piece of that I cut up. So now the base pretty well set. That's a couple of them there. And I'll just throw out some more. Yeah, I can even just squeeze out some more Payne's Gray directly from the tube, but then I'll have to spend that much more time thinning it down. And we're trying to get as much stuff on camera as we can. So once again, thin it down. So you notice I took some of the white spirits and separated it out into a different container. I did that because, well, hey, we know that we're going to be really dirtying that up. You can see it didn't take long before that whole thing just got kind of kind of dirty. Keep going here, down to the base. Now, I think I might have, the other day when I was moving figures around, I think I might have loosened up the rifle, so if that comes loose during painting, well, we'll glue that back on. I think I might do that in between segments here. Try not to make each segment too long, because I think once you go past, I try to keep them down to 35 minutes tops. I think it's easier to absorb that. Once you get too far into it, it's a little too long, and you might forget some things. So yeah, we'll glue that down, give it a little more support. So there's a third one. Now this one, if you recall from the basing episode, this one is made from the Happy Seppuku mold, and it's an actual wall of bricks as opposed to one that we constructed brick by brick, quite literally. Here we go. Continue on. Just gonna shoot some paint in here. Now, if this were a one-off figure, obviously I would probably paint the figure, well, I would certainly paint the figure separately and then stick it on the base, but this is one of probably 80 miniatures that'll be part of this army eventually. And when I'm filming my battle reports and other things, it becomes, I believe the phrase is diminishing returns. He will be part of most likely a 12-man unit, I think, because that's what full squads are in the Soviet army. And at that point, all the extra time I would spend painting something that you will not ever see. And these are those, this isn't just like in the first Army Painter episode with the Medusa, where we decided how complex do we want to get with the basing? How much of the object source lighting do we want? Do we not want any glow at all? That whole unit obviously probably could have cut down 30% of the working time if there was no object source lighting. That alone tacks on a bunch of extra work, so you have to factor those type of things in as you make those choices. When I decided to do the snow basing on this, or the urban snow basing, it had just been my usual open ground. Well, maybe the snow, or if it was deep snow, I saved some time there. Having to do the urban base meant building the base in the first place, and then also having to paint them. Now, painting bricks and broken wood that's not terribly complex, so not such a big tragedy. I'm going to go again here with, but this is really important. Now I can start to see where the lines are for my quilted uniform. And I'm going to look over here, see, I think I've got a few that are already painted up. Here, let's get some of that off of his face. Don't need it to be super, super dark in there. That's good. So let's look in our painted ones here. And I think we've got a quilted one or two. So this one's quilted, a little more on the tannish side. That one's a black tree figure, and here's another one. Again, he was painted with oils, just like what we're using now. So I'm going to leave him over here just so we can maybe refer back to him as a bit of a color guide. So I wanted you to see this part of the process. It's if I just do one and then magically disappear and come back with a whole bunch of these done, I'm not sure if that's as helpful. Because the whole idea of this is to show you what it takes to do entire units, not just a little bit on one figure and then magically there's 9 figures where there used to be just one. I think that will start to indicate just how much it either takes to get through that unit or how much time you save. I hope that even just the 2 that I worked on in that previous color test video, that gave you an indication of just how much time potentially that the oils can save you. Because to me, I've painted these in acrylics, and it's when you're just doing one or a couple, I've even done 6 or 7 at a time with acrylics. It's not a huge amount different necessarily than with the oils, but once you get into double digits number-wise, then it starts to magnify, because those darn acrylic paints are going to dry on you. And even when it was a more simple color scheme like this, I just having to factor in all that extra drying time, or had to kind of stop on some figures and not keep going because they were going to dry out on me. So I'm going to get some more. I'm going to get a lot more Payne's Gray out for this one. Not just because of the ground, but because the anti-tank rifle, a lot of the things on him are just darker. So I'm going to get out some extra Payne's Gray. See, look at the difference that makes on him. And continue applying our Payne's Gray to the helmet, which is going to be that deeper green, and the rifle. All the while realizing that yes, we are going to go over this with our regular oils, but this, as I mentioned, helps to prime that canvas. Now, if I wanted to, I could have gone with essentially just taking the oil paints and kind of scrubbing those over the top. But one thing it does is it makes it a little bit shiny on camera, makes it harder for you to see. This tends to, as I bring this one back, so see it's tinted, but there's just much less shine to it. If that had been just starting straight with oil paints to start with, it would have been a little bit shinier. And I think you saw from the first segment that even though it's been less than 24 hours now, the other 2 aren't completely dry, because again, there's regular oil paints in there too. And here you can see how much, there's a lot less shine to this than there was even less than a day ago. And that's one that was painted with the more full-on oil paint there, not done the wet method like what we're doing here. I think all I need to do is get the brick pile covered with some of these initial washes here. Can wipe away our excess, and we will be good to go. Alright, and there you have it. Gonna do the same thing that we've done in all the other ones, but trying to be aware. I don't want to catch something and rip something off. And if something wanders off camera, it's just going to happen from time to time, because I need to be able to see it and be able to get to it. Just use this to... So this is a pretty vigorous thing. I'm trying not to shake the camera, at least not too much. So we've got our initial glazes all set. Now I'm going to start actually with some of the lighter ones here. Remember we talked about using the summer, so it's essentially yellow ochre. So if need be, I could have just grabbed some yellow ochre paint, thinned it down. But what I do enjoy about this is it will dry pretty rapidly. So we're going to also bring out this gray. What I like is that it's not a dead gray. It actually has a little bit of warmth to it. We'll also have our, I think that is the Starship. We'll just have that out there as a dark. And I can either bring out more of the... So I'm going to throw out the dark mud, or I could get my raw umber back out here, but I'm going to use the dark mud because it is about the oil brushers, and I also want to, in a way, enhance some of the drying time. So there's a quilted one, right? And we're going to mix up a little bit of that Starship filth with the and now we're essentially going to wipe out our little lines here. But not to worry, those will come back. Because I think you saw in the previous episode that surprisingly you can bring back an awful lot when you use that little, you're using our Winsor Newton brush, and we were able to get back a lot of our line detail with that. So I'm going to see if there's any other that also are going to get, what the heck, let's pick one of these guys too. You know what, we're going to make him. I've done some of these actually in tan, and that was pretty fun. So let's just do it, because we don't want to have everything be exactly the same. So we're taking that same color. You can see how it, see that right there, that little streak right there, that is our initial wash. That is now blending in. Put this color that I'm applying over the top. And this is, I don't know, it might look like a dry brush, but it is not. This is a very wet brush. It would certainly, I could pretty much cover this entire figure easily with a very solid coat. It's the type of stroke that I'm using more so than paint on the brush, and you can see it's just a beat up old brush at this stage. Not too worried about it. So we've got a couple here that we start with this color, but it's also handy for some other things like, say, our boards and some of our bread bags. So let's do that right here. And I'm not going to paint every single board the same color, because we don't want the viewer to get shall we say, board. I'm going to use it on this bread bag. And it's mixing with our preliminary wash like before. I'm going to even throw some here, a little bit on his entrenching tool. And this is also the point where you start to see how this little bit goes a long way. And another reason it goes a long way is because we've primed that. See how that's just flowing across there and it's mixing along the way? Well, we're able to do that. So let's see if this guy's going to be lighter. He's going to be, he's got the darker coat, so that's going to be more in shadow. What I'm going to do then is, look at that. See how we got a nice quick little blend right there? I don't want these boards to get too light. If they do, well, my snow will not look, it's not going to look necessarily quite as white. It might almost make the snow look a little more dingy. So let's see, yeah, I'm going to go through a little dot of that. I'm going to get some of my warmer brown here. And we'll say that's good for our wood there. We got a different color we'll use for the bricks. Now let's get a little bit of mud color here. This is another part of, not just for oils, it's color efficiency. You find several places. I'm working on a color and I go, oh yeah, this is a good place for the color. See, even I haven't had a chance to attach the rifle, but brushstroke is so gentle, even that's not going to take that away. Not going to brush that away. Gonna hit this bread bag here. Essentially making those an ochre type color. I mean, we got our board here. Really like to have an icicle hanging off of that. That could be fun. And I will look up. There's another bread bag, and there's actually another board sticking out over here. Why not? And even the scarf there, I'll give that a little bit of a brownish color. And we just march through. Now on this one, maybe the boards are going to be different tone. I basically took that brown mud color, mixed it with a bit of my gray. You can see I've still yet to clean off the brush. So we was working again about 8 figures. What I'm going to do is throw another little layer here. Slightly lighter. But we're trying not to get too far out ahead of ourselves. Trying to keep things like one figure. We don't want to get 80% done with one and have others that barely have any paint on them. We want to keep things at as a level of an advance as possible. You can see how this brush starts to expand into that filbert shape that we talked about. Now let's do some boards. As this gets a little more toward the tan, And just utilizing that ability for oils to blend with themselves. Here, this one's got some of those yellow boards. We got the bread bag here. This, I'm sure, to a lot of folks looks more like the standard layering up, sort of, in a way. I'll even let a little my wood color get onto there, maybe even on this hat here. Now let's lighten this up just a touch, and I've got that sunny flesh, but it's essentially taking the place of the maiden flesh. It's an off-white that's more warm, and even just that little bit, you'll see the difference that it makes. See how much lighter that became. And work some of it into his bread bag there. You saw that it is also possible to get in and do some glazing. So it's also not completely essential. See, I'm going to make his gloves a little bit lighter here. He's holding his gloves in his hand. He's got his Molotov in the other. Now I do have one of these. We'll see. This was done with the fluorescence. Maybe we'll see if we can do something like this with the oils. We'll see. So here we go again. Not going to spend a whole lot of time shading this wood because it's gonna be covered up anyways. So why invest a lot of time painting something that's probably gonna be covered up? So what I will do is work my way back around to my original guys. The two that we determined we really wanted that tan color. Here we go. And nowhere near our lightest color. I think you can see on the palette just how dark this is compared to that sunny flesh or whatever it was called. Yeah, I just painted a bunch of, oddly enough, in acrylic, this exact same color around a week ago. In fact, it was 1 week ago today because I needed them for, well, my opponent needed them for our battle report. And those battle reports, those have been, for now, more of a picture-based, still image-based. Those are on the blog. That's just James Wappel blogspot. But the video battle reports, those are on the YouTube channel. So actually, if you just explore the channel that you're probably watching right now with this video, you'll be able to find those there. So what I'm going to do is, what we'll do is we'll show you next stage of this. We can lighten it up a little bit. I think we've got him where you can see him and see how we can start to reveal those quilted lines. I know it looked like we had completely wiped those away before, but guess what? We haven't even gone to our lightest color yet. They're already starting to come back. And if need be, we can do this even more intensely. So I just wanted you to see an example of that at work. Then we've also got our last guy over here. And again, this is the tan overcoat. Just as we did when he was along the lines of the dark brown. Throw some down. We have a brush that we can use for blending that, so that it doesn't just become lines. We'll get some lighter tones here on the cuff of the sleeve, on the collar, on his chest there, the collar on his back. You can see even with the tiny brush, we can still blend a little bit. But like I said, with every brush stroke you do with this wet and wet blending, it picks up that much more of the original, I don't want to call it dirty color, because it more of the original color, and the brush is, all intents and purposes, gets dirty. And sometimes you can count on that and utilize it, but let's so now we've got some tan coats. We started to work one of our quilted guys. Now we're going to get into some of our other colors. Throw in some of the more of the reddish tones, even some on the flesh tone, the bricks, some of the rifle stocks, and these pieces of gear that they're wearing. So we'll be right back with that part of it. Now we're going to get into the reddish tones like we talked about, and also those darker coats, more like the ones you see on the right, or the center guy in the picture on the left-hand side. So let's dive into that. We've got the Starship Filth. We throw a little bit of the green out there too. And here's another one of my favorites. I absolutely love the red primer color. In some ways, it's a little bit like a burnt sienna. It's like a slightly grayed down version, I would say, of a burnt sienna. So let's start this off. I'm going to actually mix it in with a little bit of, so I've got my gray out here still. Mix it in with some of the yellows. It's going to be the start of my skin tone here. You won't be able to see too much of that at this stage, but we're just going to throw some in. What's really helpful for is the bricks. Now as I do this, if you can see, maybe especially from above, there's 2 rows of bricks there. That was when I was doing the basing video. Instead of doing 2 rows of bricks, one in front of the other, that's where I did the effect of maybe having some plaster on the inside of the wall. Because I had debated doing the 2 levels of bricks, but I thought, well, that's fairly straightforward. All you're doing is just, well, placing 1 row of bricks behind the other, and I think if you can build a 1 row, you can certainly do a second. So I didn't think you needed to spend time watching me do that. What I hadn't tried before was that plaster effect behind the brick wall, and I was really glad I did that. That was fun. I think it's going to be really interesting either painting that or maybe even throwing some kind of poster or graffiti. You see all of these Russian vehicles. So I see my bricks laid out now. It's starting to get a little more color. And here, while yes, bricks should be more towards the red, I don't want every single brick to be the same color. So I'm just kind of picking and choosing different bricks here. And maybe I'll do a darker red on some, or so here we have just some bricks there. I've got a little bit of green here. I can just tone down some of my red, make it a little deeper. Let's say we take just some of that red and we gray it down. So it just looks a little more interesting with bricks that aren't just the exact same color. And I can still take that and highlight my other bricks with it. Keeping in mind that this gets too light. Like I said before, the snow, and some of the snow is going to look dirtier, which maybe that's something you might want too. And just as I've said a few times, this is that point where a little goes a long way with the oils. You can see me just grabbing more and more dainty amounts of color, if that's the expression I want to actually use. But see here, it starts to mix with that preliminary wash, which then changes the color, and you can really see it there. So those couple of streaks of darker color. But by wiping most of that away, see some of these pouches, I'm just going to start to, that might be a map case. I'd have to look at the sprue. Each of the Warlord game sprues tends to have an ID. Maybe it's a case for additional rounds, for magazines. Yeah, like I said, there's the map case. There's a few different items along those lines. So let's lighten up one of these bricks here. It's all very grayish red, and it seems light, but that has more to do with the context of what's around it. We've got a mostly bare hands. This is one of the advantages that the Soviets had when it did get to be wintertime. They had gloves that were essentially specially adapted for winter fighting. That they could have their whole hand in there, or if they needed to pull the trigger, they could basically pull out their trigger finger, but the rest of the hand was at least still in the glove. Yeah, let's put a little red on these bricks. I did learn that the White Death, the famous Finnish sniper, he would actually eat ice so that his breath would not show up as much. He wouldn't get that warm breath hitting the cold, really cold air, and it didn't reveal his position as much. I heard a lot of different things about him, but that was definitely an interesting tactic. I know there are definitely rules for winter combat and bolt action, and especially in the winter of 41, they tend to really, they are not good for the Germans. And I'm going to just work some of that, some of the red into here where there's those straps, pouches. I think as you saw from the two color test ones, this skin tone is not going to remain this color. What I'm trying to do is have it actually mix with that pre-wash that we did. So there's not much of the face there, so we're just going to do a little indication of it there, get his hand going here. So he's not wearing gloves. And let the rifle stock a little bit. And we've got his pouches and cases. I believe this was for... Yeah, see that I didn't have too many of the round case pouches. There's more of the kind of an equal amount of square and round. The last one here. Face is a little more open and easy to get to. Oh, we still have some bricks here to do. And so we're going, there we go. You can see I'm using this as the filbert brush. If this makes you uncomfortable just kind of working the way I am with one of these beat up brushes like this, all spread out, well, hey, you can go ahead. You don't have to work this way, but believe me, there's going to be plenty of paint around this, and any paint that goes over the edge is certainly going to be covered. And I see his hand here. So, I got some pouches to do here. I think the bricks hit these pouches real quick. Now, we can start to lighten this up a little bit. I've got some of the what's left of the color that was used to lighten up the tan. So instead of trying to find just that next flesh tone color, well, guess what? You can see that makes a pretty good flesh tone, doesn't it? Unless if that wasn't wet, you'd have a hard time seeing it on my finger. That's what I enjoy about the oils. It's almost a little bit easier to take just random colors that are on your palette, combine those. Because obviously if that was acrylic paints, that it'd be tougher to do this. I do it a lot, but then it's planning more for it. This you don't really have to plan as much for something like that. Even at this stage, I'm still going to be relatively rough with all this. You can see how light the brush strokes are because I still haven't bothered to re-glue that gun yet. And I'll continue on adding my reds here. Just to lighten things up. You can see that every so often I go, now see, actually he's wearing one of those gloves with the one finger. So I'm going to stop putting skin colors on that. this is another reason why I like to work this way, because I have really not a lot of time invested in that. Even this thing, if I wanted to change this whole uniform to a different color, I only have a few minutes invested in it, so making a change, well, that's not going to bug me very much. Well, at least it shouldn't. So let's get a few of these bricks to be lighter. And the whole point, once again, to take advantage of what the oils offer. There's some things that you could do with acrylics that you just can't really, either can't do them with oils, or they're just not terribly convenient with the oils. Well, that's fine, because they provide you with other things that the acrylics certainly can't do. Again, I apologize if some things wander off camera. And I think I've mentioned this in the last few episodes. I'm trying to think about possibly a second camera that would maybe show the palette a little more. There are some, well, downsides to that. Because where would that image go? How big would it be? And while it's one thing to have my reference photos like I've got in the corners, they don't move. They just sit there, and over the course of a 2-hour video, they almost become background noise. They're not really part of the scene anymore. But if I had a palette there with a riot of colors on it, would it be too distracting? Also, I've done this for quite a while now, and I'm used to actually filming this way without that whole second camera thing. And for the few folks who have been here and seen how this setup works, they also know that there is very little room in this area. It's pretty much me, the palette, and there's not vast amounts of space for other things. There's 5 different lights pointing from different directions. There's my magnifier light. There's the swing arm lamp that's covering there, that's holding this camera that you're watching now. And I still need to be able to see my monitor. And it can only be in one spot, right in front of me. And the more stuff I put in front of that, it makes it really, really difficult. So we've got we'll just call that for now with our reds. Let's get to those darker browns that we talked about. So here's our Starship Filth. Start off with that. I'm even going to mix a tiny bit of green with it. We know this guy, we wanted to be having that darker overcoat color, just like some of our guys in the pictures. And right away, see how it's mixing with some of the underlying glaze color. And all of a sudden, some things that looked a little bit dark, they don't look quite so dark. We got something to compare it to. So we'll pick out which other ones are going to be dark. Now we've got one. I think this will be a lighter one. We'll just have this be a darker one. It already looks pretty dark. These are those choices that you have to make. Now maybe you just choose to go ahead and have everybody be the same. Because now some people, they like that uniformity of color. Haha. Yeah, sorry about that little pun right there. Didn't mean to do that. For me, I sort of prefer things to have a different look because not everybody's been out in the field for the same amount of time. So this will be my last one that's of a darker color. Most of mine tend to be towards the darker spectrum here. But certainly when you have the winter troops, and this is something that I've noticed even with other people's armies, in a way it's a chance to get a little more variety in the army. The summer uniforms, well, it's a little bit easier for everybody to pretty much look exactly the same. Now, it's another reason why I wanted him to be a little darker, and I think you'll see why when I find my Molotov guy. Well, if I want to have the object source lighting, if he's wearing the lighter coat, like this one, yeah, it'll show up on him, but not quite as much. Oops, sorry. I should have that on the screen for you. So as I did before, we're going to grab our gray. It's thinned down a little bit, so let's go back to our first one. And what I really enjoy about the oils is, let's say I was painting 40 of these. I could have gone, worked my way all around 39 other figures, come back around here, and in all likelihood, unless I stopped for the day and came back, the paint on this guy would be every bit as workable as it was when I first painted it on there. So that, once again, a big advantage. I think the reason I'm not gonna have too many of the light colored ones out there is, well, there's no fancy difference. I just essentially start with this color of gray. It's my starting point instead of my highlight color. And we'll continue on. I think we got one last coat that's in the darker range. See how this brush, when it turns into a filbert, it just makes blending a cinch. And if at this point, let's say for you it's too difficult to work the oils this wet, maybe you give it a few hours to settle. You may not have a choice. Maybe you don't get back to your painting for several days and it's dry anyway. Maybe a plan for that. So let's swing back again. I'm going to do his boots here in this color. maybe hit some of the ground. Not gonna spend a whole bunch of time on the ground. Oops, I see I got some bricks here that we need to do. Because snow will cover a huge portion of this. And I'm gonna now shift. I do sometimes have a cleaner container here for thinness. It brush still has a little bit of a sharp-ish point to it. I'm gonna lighten up our gray a touch. Get down to our next level here. Here's my first one. And watch how we just blend that in. But now if I want to do this somewhere else, I had to go back and get some clean color. I'm going to go back, get some clean color. Let it do its blending thing here. Then I have to go back, get that clean color. As soon as it starts to blend in, that's fantastic. But like I said, it's taking away some of your highlight, basically. It's great that it mixes, but you have to realize that as it's doing that, it's changing what's on your brush. It's not some scary, weird thing. It's just once you get used to it and you're aware of it, you learn how to control it, manipulate it. So, let's see, we're starting to match what we have on the original. And I think you saw me thin that down a little bit, which is why that's actually going to cover there. If I hadn't thinned this down, it would have much more difficulty sticking. This is why I've got that extra batch of the white spirits out here that's a little cleaner until I forget what it is and use it to clean a brush, and well, then it's dirty. And like I did with the color test figures, I can use a smaller brush. There's also smaller, I have smaller ones, craft brushes like this. This one's an 8. I think I've got some that are 6s. I think I might even have some that are 4s. So I'm not trying to force you to use a material that you're not necessarily comfortable with. So we have another one that's going to be light. All right, that's good. We'll do the same thing here on his collar, not his collar, on his cuff on his sleeve there. And again, to make that paint stick there, had to thin it down, and see, now it sticks. I have to admit that as I'm charging away, especially when it's my own stuff and I just have been working for hours and hours and hours, I will sometimes just use the figure as a palette. I'll just grab paint and just throw it on the figure in one spot. Like, just take this and put a bunch here, go over here, work somewhere else, and then come back to this and smooth that down. I'm trying to avoid doing that to you now in this little training video here, because that might be a little bit much for if this is, especially if this is your first time that you're working with oil paints. So I'm going to stop there with the darker one. I'm going to just grab my ones that are going to be so-called lighter here. And now that I've pretty much reached the point, back to our filbert again. And in a flash, you'll see this is going to happen pretty quick. See how it starts to turn lighter. It's mixing all the while with the colors that are underneath, and I was counting on that. This is why I like that preparation of the surface. I really shouldn't call it priming. I should call it preparing the surface. So now we've got overall a much lighter. I don't know if it's much lighter, but it's lighter. I'll just call it that. And we're going to do the same thing here. You can see how, again, it happens pretty quick. Trying to be aware of, even at this stage, where lights and darks are. And what he'll do is he'll contrast with that darker brick on the wall just a bit. Now I've got this lighter color out here. And there we go. Poof. You can see it just doesn't take a lot to lighten things, but that, I don't want to call it automatic blending. That really wouldn't be the right term, but boy, it sure kind of feels like it. So if I have too much paint on there, see, I'll scrub some of that away. And then I will just mix what I've got already on figure. We've got our other figure here that has the lighter colors. Find those spots. Remember, I can always glaze in some darks. I can always modify the color. So in that area there, I'm going to leave that dark because it really should just be in shadow. So this is not supposed to, I don't want it to be a white coat. It's supposed to be some kind of light tannish gray. And maybe again, something that has just, it's been out in the field for a long time, so it has a little more whiteness to it. I'll just do a tiny bit more here. And what I'll do is, I think I'll go back to things like the faces, maybe some other details, maybe the rifles and other little gadgets and gizmos that guys may have on them. Some of the gear. Now you pretty much saw how I painted both of the faces, so I don't think you need me to show you how to paint 8 complete faces. I'll show a few. That should give you a good enough idea how I would approach it. It's not so different. The faces will be obviously more of a similar color. I wanted you to see how I might go about throwing out a few different uniform colors. We'll also do some of the helmets. So that's probably what I will lead off with in the next segment is the helmets, then move on to the faces and some of the other gear. I think this episode is going to be a longer one. I don't necessarily want to have to break it down into 2 episodes. I think I want this to be a little more continuous for you. So, well, we've got some light uniforms here that will contrast certainly with the darker ones. So next segment we'll get to the helmets, do some stuff with the faces, maybe some of the medals too. So we'll be with that in just a second. I want to get to the helmets. It's something that we didn't have on our first couple of color test figures. And I think what I've got out here is my field green color. I know I've used this same thing on some of my German infantry that I've painted with oils. And you can see some of those guys on the France 1940 battle reports and in our Barbarossa campaign. So like before, we're just gonna let this blend in with the shading that's already there that we did with that initial preparation of the surface. So we've got one helmet. Here's our second one. I won't get too involved. Perfectly smooth shading here because, well, the paint's gonna be, if not chipped, it's gonna be roughed up in some way. And after I apply this last little bit right here, I'll show you another reason why it's not crucial to have perfect shading. That's why, because these helmets, they're going to stay cold. And you would certainly have snow piling up. If it happens, I wear a baseball hat. Just walk into the grocery store a couple of blocks and snow is piled up on that thing, 1/2 an inch to 1 inch. It's certainly going to pile up on a steel helmet. So now that I had to use a little bit of that lighter color stuff, the same color we were using to lighten up our uniforms. And I'm really searching for 2 places here. The brim of the helmet and the top of the helmet. And that's about what I can do without thinning it down. I don't want to have to thin it down right now, because I still have 2 other ones that we want to add a little bit of that lighter tone. I also have to think, if this is a snow environment here, this faces up towards the sky. It might be an overcast day, one of those sort of gray winter days. So I'd want a touch of, see how that turns out almost a little bit of a bluer green instead of a U.S. Army olive green, that yellowish green. We don't want that. So now I'm going to thin this down, come back around to the first one again. And when we do the snow effects on these, you'll see why we're taking this approach. So what I will do is, after complete these guys, I will give them at least a day to dry thoroughly. Another reason why I'm emphasizing the Mig Ammo oil brushers. So now we've got ourselves some pretty decent shading here. I need to thin that down a bit because it's still, and see it now all of a sudden I can get some color on here. When you're doing the historical things, there seems to be much less emphasis on the dramatic shading. Notice it first with vehicles, but then it sort of spread to everything else. And while I have this green, I'm going to set some of these out of the way. Let's find some other places we can use this. Let's see what happens with a few of my boards here. It's not going to quite register as green because it's also mixing with some of the colors that are there. Not going to do it on all of them. What I'm also going to do is very sneaky, be real sneaky with it and drop some of that into my overcoat. This is one of the ways that you can keep something that might ordinarily be a little boring visually, be a little more interesting. And even if they don't see it or take notice, it's going to make it a little more fun for you from a painting standpoint. You might, instead of it everything being just brownish gray, we've thrown a little green in here. Gives it a bit of a, even right here, see, just on that one side, not the whole thing. I don't want it to look like a green hat. If I just throw a few shots of that green every so often, and found a few of these. See here on the underside of the sleeve, nobody's gonna, even if they stared at that thing, they wouldn't say, oh, look at that green right there. What they will do is, you know, they'll just be more interested in it. It'll seem like there's more there, because there actually is. Now on the tan ones, you'll probably see that it's a little bit more. I can notice that a bit. That stands out. That's not a horrible thing, because in some ways it becomes reflected light of that snow, perhaps. See, we'll do it on his, it's not so much a boot, it's more of a covering on the boot. And I did this with my acrylic versions. Obviously, more of a challenge to do it with the acrylics than the oils, because the oils just let you, boy, get away with just about anything. It is, to me, it is the easy button. I hope that it translates that way. So I'm going to throw some here on the bread bag. Not that he has green bread. Yeah, I suppose he could, but not going to taste super nifty. And maybe a touch of green here on his scarf. We will lighten that up. And Just have some fun with that. I'm gonna actually do a little more on these helmets. Just gonna find a few spots. I have to make sure I don't go too crazy with that. I'm just gonna do it on that brim there. Also, if I make it too light, that same problem is gonna happen with the snow. The snow is going to not be light enough to stand out. Yeah, I'm gonna do that on this scarf here. Let's lighten that up a touch more. I think I have to throw out some more of my lighter colors, but the idea is to just wait on that, not do it too soon. Good enough. Now, I promised in this set we would also mess around with our metals a bit. But I'm going to work on the face just a touch here on the skin and the faces, because the same thing can actually happen when you're working with oils that can happen with acrylics. You start to work with metallics and all of your brushes, everything starts to get kind of tainted with metals. So I have got my same, these are the same colors that I had on earlier before. And I'll switch to the smaller brush here. And now start to pop in some lighter tones on the fingers. The other reason I'm not entirely sure I'm going to paint every single face is you may not be able to see him. You know, he's got this big old anti-tank rifle, and I'm not quite sure if the camera is going to focus on the rifle or on his face. It seems like it has focused on his face a little bit there. Again, none of this is anywhere near the lightest color. And what you're just going to see happen here is I'm just going to let the color that's already on there start to darken the new color that I'm adding. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring up these were some of the guys from the initial episode here. So it definitely is possible to do skin on those and do the eyes even while the oils are wet. I would suggest, if this is your first time with the oils, maybe you do part of the faces with the oils the way I did when I first started with the oils. I did not, that first time around, it was Winter Americans. So they were an awful lot like this, in coats with scarves, and they had their helmets and such, gloves. And I think maybe I did, maybe not even this much on the faces. It may be about this much, and then the rest I did with acrylics, because at the time I just felt like acrylics I was more comfortable with those, and I could be more efficient that way. The more I use the oils, comfort level started to expand a bit. And then I felt like it was not going to be a problem to do more of the face with the oils. And I think you recall on those other ones with the faces, we added some green to make the 5 o'clock shadow. We can do that here too. You can see I had to blend that away. And once again, this brush that I'm utilizing here is actually a really worn down Winsor Newton Series 7 that for painting acrylics it practically doesn't work. There's so few hairs on it, it's been ground down so much. It's almost useless for regular acrylic paints. And it's about to toss it out, and I think maybe I just accidentally grabbed it, and I started using it. I said, wait a minute. This is a very interesting brush. So again, sorry if I'm kind of wobbling the table a bit here. Just trying to find the best spot. And who knows, depending on how many people start to dive into the Army Painter pledge levels, I may look into getting a different table. So see here, just working on the eyes. I thin this down so that I can get coverage here. Is he wearing a glove? Nope, not wearing a glove. Just allowing things to mix together. So I think yep. Got one sneaky guy over here. Looks like he's on camera. And he doesn't seem to be, at least on his one hand, he's not wearing a glove. And he doesn't seem to be wearing a glove on either hand. And I've got another step lighter with skin tone and eyes. But what I will do, once I work my way around the unit with this, I'm going to break out those metals. And we'll work with those. We did it on both of the initial color test figures and got some really nice results with that. I was really happy that it worked just like it did with the metal medium, that Vallejo metal medium. I was really surprised. So here, while I've got some green and while you're watching this, so I'm going to tone that down, but also just get a little green onto that forehead. Let's do it here on this guy. Again, while we have it, why not? Maybe even make it a little darker. And make sure. Yeah, sorry, I'm shaking the camera again. So we're doing a little bit of that 5 o'clock shadow now. Mentioned it a few times. The detail on these figures, well, it's not the same as 75 millimeter fantasy figures or Dark Sword figures. That's just, it's kind of how it is. Actually, the Dark Sword figure for this month is going to be done in oils. Got that one all set up and ready to go. And just working my way through the. Now he has that special glove, so we are not going to paint any kind of a hand there, but we are going to try and drop in some green here. This is the same green that we used for those helmets. Same green for that. Let's get a little bit of the dark in here. Hopefully you can see that. We have a few more here. And then we get into the metals. A few more shots here. Now, if you remember on the core test, guys, I try to give their faces a combination of the red nose, so that cold, like their faces, the blood vessels were trying to get blood to that face. Now I'm not gonna do too much with the face here. Again, we want to see if we're gonna do those effects with the lighting. So we're gonna leave ourselves some room with that. One last face. We're all the way back around to that first guy again. And just leave that. Be good enough for now. Get a little bit of green in here. Because now it's time for metals, and just like we talked about before, so gunmetal, throw it out here. It doesn't take much, but boy, the mica, like you don't see the flakes in there, that's fantastic. And our Payne's Gray homemade oil brusher. And take the Payne's Gray, we mix it up with our metal. And over the top. So it's just going to look really dark right now. That is kind of what we want. As we discussed in that first episode, they certainly did not want bright, shiny gun barrels. That's going to attract way more attention your way than you really want. So if they didn't have that burnished metal, they were certainly going to have some type of, put mud on it or do something to tone that down. So you can see at this point I still haven't had a chance to glue on that rifle. That's how gentle we can work. Now this is the one I really wanted to see. The metals with that big old iconic drum magazine there. So that gives us the metal effect. It darkens it down. Do the same on these others. Again, mixing the Payne's gray in there to give it that really dark blue-gray metal. We did use the aluminum at a certain point. To brighten things up. On our color test figures. And as I hit this last one here, we even mixed a little green in there, I think. We mixed some sky blue in for when we were doing our highlights. I think one of these guys has a pouch hanging off his back, and that's the one I'm looking for. And just pop it like so. And there's the effect that we got on our guns. Now I'll go a little bit more to the aluminum. I'm actually going to grab some of the, I think this was the aluminum. Yeah. So there's some of the aluminum. You can see it's a bit brighter. So we lighten it up a touch. And let's go back to our anti-tank rifle, because that's what we started with. I think I've said this a few times. You'll be amazed if you just give the paint even 5 minutes to just sort of settle in place. It can be easier to work with, especially if you're adding secondary layers to it. And we will, in the next segment, I'm going to go after a few details of things. And sort of wrap it up for the main body of the unit. Now here, this is probably where, when I go do some of the details, I'll grab that smaller brush. I just am trying to get a few indications of maybe where I want some lighter stuff to be. I think this case was probably, painted green. It's one of the things I do like about the historicals is the research involved. So we'll keep going here. Get these to a certain point. Like so. Down we go. And all the while trying to keep in mind that these guys are not going to be walking around with shiny rifles. That's a little too dangerous. We can do shiny metals on another thing, maybe a bust or whatever, where it's a little more appropriate. So I will break out some. It's a little bit lighter. We've got the smaller brush here. We'll thin it down. And you can drop in a few of these lights, and like I said, when we get into more of a detailed phase, just like adding eyeballs to the eyes, though, we can do more things with the midtones on these metals. See, that's thin paint, and see how it will still gonna cover, even though that is wet oils on wet oils. So where's my other one with the drum magazine here? We'll try and do the same thing. And here where you've got the venting holes to cool it. So I think that's one of the most pleasant surprises of this particular video, is seeing what the oil brusher metals are like. I've got his bayonet here. I think that might be somewhat more shiny. I always have a blending brush handy. So we've got some of our elements of the sights and the barrel. Just a few touches there. Trying to turn that so you can see it. This version of the drum magazine, it's also important to get one little light there. Maybe bring out the trigger mechanism a touch. But most of that I'm going to actually bring out with some darker glazes. One last touch here on our anti-tank rifle. Yeah, everything else I do on that's going to be in terms of adding darks. So there you have it. We have some faces. We got some metal, especially here in our bayonet and on our drum magazine. So there'll be one last little segment here where we do some details and do some finalizing on our unit before we say it's ready for the snow effects. We're in that final detail phase here. I'm going to put out some of my dark colors again. Got my green, my starship felt out there. Also added a touch of red. I needed for obviously the stars on their caps, but also for some elements on the faces. Now this you can't really see too much. I'm just strengthening up some darks there, but here what I've been doing is actually a few glazes. I want to make sure you can see that. Just in places like this handle here, and almost like I was using water. See, I'm taking a little more of the white spirits, and I actually did myself a little bit of a glaze right there. Now we've got a seam here. And take some of this green. I'm going to mix it with a little Payne's gray to make a darker green. And we'll throw in a few shadows here. And if it ever gets too intense, I've always got some of my blending brushes here so I can tone it down. I also need to give these guys some eyes. So let's see if we can do that. I think I've got it in a space where you can see it. So we have one eyeball there. Another one there. He doesn't look too cross-eyed. So at this stage, especially with the oil, sometimes you have to go back and clean a few things up. As you saw the way we were working with this, it's a little more, in some ways, indirect than when you're going to use the acrylics. So this, once again, we're going to get some of our yellow ochre out here and lighten that up and get some highlights there on his overcoat. Because we don't have too many of those in this part of the figure. It's going to be tough for you to see, I realize that. But this is that refinement. And especially with oils, it's you kind of go and go and go and you make kind of a mess, and from there you start to carve out the miniature. And I talk about this even when I'm doing the acrylic stuff, and I say that in some ways we're sculpting the miniature with paint. But I think when you talk about oils, you're really taking that to heart. I think you are genuinely starting to sculpt with paint. This is a more interesting or a little different sculpting tool. We'll call it that. It's a little different sculpting tool than, say, your standard acrylics are. Each one is fine. I believe me, I paint far more with acrylics than I get to paint with oils. This is not to say that acrylics are not as good as oils, nothing like that. And I don't even necessarily prefer one over the other. If I only did one or the other, I would get kind of bored, actually. I don't think it would be as fun if I only did one. So let's put him aside. I don't want to get too deeply engaged in just one figure, because we need to go around and solidify several things here. So I see I need to get my red star on this cap here. Like so. We'll shade that a little more later. See, I've got to strengthen some lines here. And I'm going to use that red mixed with green. And we're going to try and create a little more oomph on his face, and then try and give him some eyes too. Try and figure out which way should he be looking. Is he looking for a target? Has he heard something and he's wondering if there's a threat coming? So sometimes just the expression on the Figure which way he's looking can make a big difference. I try to think about that as I put these together also. You know, which way would they be looking? Now, I'm going to see if I can find myself almost a more orangey red. There's a rust red. Gonna get my yellow ochre back out here because I want to do some of these rifle stocks, and I need more of an orangey brown color for that, and that's starting to help. And as always, if I need to get stuff to kind of move and flow, thin it down. These bread bags here. Let's see if I can do a glaze or two for you. And he's in a good spot. And so I've got now almost, look at that, it's basically a glaze. It's what you would do with acrylics. I certainly did not think that would be possible with oils at all, ever. Not in a million years would I thought I could do something like what I just did here. Essentially a dark glaze over the top of that brick. Now, even at this stage as I work on some of these details, I have to think, don't forget about the snow that's going to be piled on these. Not just from a visual standpoint, but, well, spending time on things that might be covered up. Remember, this is the guy, it reminded me when I looked at this guy, that was one of the reasons why we just stuck him on the base and painted him, because there is no way that we would see all of this stuff down in here. Now what I also want to do is on some of the hands here, and I did this on our color test guys, and I do this even on non-winter figures, whatever, but I like to have a little bit of green on the back of the hand, because you can see even mine with the blood vessels there. I think from a distance that might almost register as a greenish tone. Gonna see if I can get some lights in here. Just sneaking in a few. See if I can get some lights on his face. Again, I hope this is an area you can see it. It's tough because these faces are behind hoods and hats and collars. But then again, an awful lot of miniatures are that way. So we'll set that one aside too. I see we have a rifle stock here that could use a little bit of this lighter treatment. Even try and get a bit of a wood grain in on that. Spread bag. Possibly another light or two, because I glazed this a little bit before. Trying to jazz up a little bit of contrast here and there. I can even throw some on that board. Trenching tool. That's going to be his glove, so let's not make that skin tone. I'm going to make it sort of a grayish green here. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of a glaze right there. Now, I put some eyes in here. I doubt you'll be able to see that at all. First thing I did was reinforce the line under the helmet. And then some dots for the eyes. There's one. And there's a second one. So I've got them looking off in this direction. And let's see what happens when we throw a little bit of a glaze in here too. Because I think I want whatever hood that he's wearing to be darker. I made it lighter. This is another one of those changes that we're making. So here the shadow underneath this, and I see if I can't give a greenish tint to that, semi-lighten it up a bit. Yeah, that's all I wanted, just a little touch right there. Set him aside. This is one that is on our color test, so I'll get him out of the way. We don't want to be working on them. And here's another one. And this is one that you can do some refinement on for sure. We also need to get that another rifle stock. It's just kind of a gray. Needs to have some type of color to it. And now go back to establishing a few dark lines. This is with the Payne's Gray. Essentially Payne's Gray mixed with that raw umber. Now this field cap here, I need to get that more towards tan. It's another reason I put tan out on the palette here, this yellow ochre. It's looking a little too grayish. But you notice I'm not covering over everything I did. Maybe it's a little faded, but and now there's a bit of a tan. We have to get the fold here in the center. We had kind of lost that a little bit. So on some of these epaulets, the collars, those are those things that tend to get zonked. Here's some of these again when the submachine gun, we need to get those vents working. So here I'm just going to make this darker. It's just no matter what I do, it seems to blend into the face too much. That's a little better contrast. Eyes again. And notice how the pupil touches, makes contact with the eyelid. It's pretty important because otherwise he'd either look like he's looking up or down, or he's looking really, really scared, which I suppose would make sense here. So back to my grayish skin color here. And I see I've got some pouch straps. Every so often I look around and I go, oh, how did I not do that? It's another thing I like about the oils, because say you're working with acrylics, and you've been using a certain set of colors on something like all of the pouches of 40 guys, and you find out later, oh, good grief, there's 2 of these guys that I never really did their pouches. here, you can see it didn't take long at all, because the colors are all right there. And since now if I hadn't noticed it, I could still blend things. Now let's fool around, experiment here. A little bit of a greenish glaze on the bread bag there. Yeah. See what I just did in here? And I'm gonna do another one here. To me, this is sort of the reward with the oils. In a way, you deal with the mayhem early on, where you're just trying to do those initial washes and you're slapping color around, and it just doesn't look like it's going to be much anything. And then lo and behold, kind of like a sculpture, becomes revealed. Just a little more with each refinement. A little more each time. And you can exert as much control over this as you want. You know, I can let these dry. Work on them again. I can play a couple of games with them and go back. I've done that too. Sometimes you just need them for a game. I did that with some Charlemagne Division troops. They were not done, but since it was a pictorial battle report and I knew I wasn't going to get too many close-ups of them, you were never going to notice that they weren't, well, to a lot of people they looked done anyways, but to me I knew they weren't done. So yeah, on the bricks, I can pick out some of these like so. And here's our Molotov guy. Now this is something I think I'll just have to refer to you some of my other object source lighting sessions. I've got a ton of those. Well, I like to do it in oils. I don't think nothing to me equals my fluorescent paints. You can try, and I have tried myself even to try and get the same effect, and no matter how bright you think those doggone colors are, they're just not bright enough. Now, I might try to fool around with that a little bit here, and a little bit of an add-on segment. But it's one of those where you need extreme lights. I'm just going to get this stuff here, get this rifle stock. See, get that a little more. Try and get a little wood grain on here. Well, it's freaky. You can see that moving around. So I will have to glue that down. So yeah, I won't mess around anymore with that so we'll set him aside. Now we've got this guy here who's got the quilted uniform, and we're going to try and put some definition on him. Not going to mess with the eyes too much because you will just not see it. They're way too deep in that helmet, set far back. But this is really more what I wanted you to see anyway. Now that's a case of these being some older miniature. Well, they're not super old, but there's a few places where the details, like here, I pretty much just I ended up filing away some of the detail to get rid of an old line. Now what we can do is, with some thin down paint, we start to reinstate that quilted pattern here. Now you can really see that. I see we've got a belt here that's missing a color. I got a pouch here that needs some highlights. All right. And let's see if we can, speaking of highlights, let's get a few on the quilted uniform here. Kind of been waiting on this guy for a while to get to this part of him. And we've got ourselves a bit of a water container there. And I apologize if I go quiet, it's me actually trying to hold my breath. It's one way to steady your hand. You hold your breath, you steady your slow down your heartbeat. It sounds crazy, but it does get the job done. Again, a little bit on my gun stock there. You can see I'm just dipping into some colors that are already on the palette. That's why the oils just tend to go a little bit faster, because the colors, you just sort of look around, you go, oh yeah, there we go, I can use that. Oh look, there we go, I can use that. Especially since you know you can mix right on the figure itself. We got this anti-tank rifle. I'm going to get my Payne's Gray back out here. Now, the other things we wanted to do was to work on that gunmetal and do some refinement on that. So now I'm going to bring in some darks, especially where there's edges that got a little fuzzy. And some of these will be glazes, and just like if you were to glaze metallic paints, well, it cuts down on that metallic shine, and hopefully you can see what just happened there on that barrel. That's actually an intentional thing. Now I've got an advantage here because the metal colors, I'm even going to glaze the helmet here a little bit. The metal colors are still actually wet. Normally that is not something that an option that I have available to me. What was I going to do? I was going to just put a little glaze over that gear. And there's another thing too, if you end up with something that you don't really like, well, maybe we just cover it up with snow. There's times on miniatures where, boy, there's just, I don't know, sometimes feet are weird on miniatures, and I just say, the heck with it, and I end up using static grass or whatever, and I practically cover up the foot. Because for whatever reason, it just looked awful. It wasn't doing it for me. And I just ended up wiping it out. Getting rid of the problem that way. So here, can you see that? I think I got it in a spot. I'm just going to, again, it's with the glazing. Let things mix a little bit. It sort of softens things. I see that is actually supposed to be skin colored, so it's another area that just somehow went by the wayside. And back to my greenish color here on the back of the hand. And I'm going to get some lighter color back on the palette here. I think I know what I'm going to do with that object source. I'm going to make it part of the snow basing, because we still got to do that yet. And I certainly want that to be very much dry before I screw around with it. So I think that is a good halfway measure, meeting in the middle there. Because the snow video wasn't going to be terribly long, even though I was going to try and show you a few different ways. It is, snow is snow. And you guys might have your own method that you like already. And here in these drum magazines, can darken some things down. Definitely have to hit these vents to make those darker. Same thing here. Again, I'm just finding some glaze. I can even throw a little bit of glaze on that helmet. And darken down the metal there. So hopefully this has given you a nice set of ideas that you can try, not necessarily on historical figures. Maybe you're going to do this on Wild West figures or fantasy figures or a different type of historical miniature. Now this will just about conclude I think this is part 4, or no, this is part 3. Yeah, part 4. We've just added something to it. We're going to do A little bit of fire and ice, we'll call it. How does that sound? So there we've got it. We've got the rest of our unit. We have a few different colors of coats here. We've got the dark. We've got the tan color. We've got the lighter color. We matched some of our reference photos. We matched some of our previously painted miniatures here. So I hope this gives you some good ideas moving forward. And thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next episode of Fire and Ice.